Snow was falling steadily in Canton, Massachusetts, in the early hours of January 29, 2022. It was the kind of storm that muffles sound, that erases edges, that turns streets into quiet corridors of white. Just after 6 a.m., a body was discovered lying in the snow outside a suburban home on Fairview Road. The man was John O'Keefe, a 46-year-old Boston police officer. He was unresponsive, severely injured, and showing signs of hypothermia. Within hours, he would be pronounced dead. And within days, the woman who loved him would be accused of killing him. Karen Reed and John O'Keefe had been in a relationship for roughly 2 years. Friends described it as passionate but complicated. On the night before O'Keefe's death, the couple had gone out drinking with friends, eventually ending up at a local bar. Surveillance footage would later confirm they were there together, laughing, socializing, moving between groups. Alcohol was flowing. It was late. Snow had already begun to fall. Sometime after midnight, plans shifted. A small group decided to continue the night at a house party at 34 Fairview Road, the home of a fellow Boston police officer. Karen Reed drove John O'Keefe in her Lexus SUV. According to phone records and testimony, they arrived outside the house shortly after 12:30 a.m. What happened next is the center of one of the most polarizing criminal cases in recent American memory. Karen Reed says John O'Keefe got out of the vehicle. She says she waited, texted him, called him, but he never came back. Eventually, she drove away. Hours later, panicked and frantic, she returned to Fairview Road with friends to look for him. It was Karen Reed who first spotted his body in the snow. From the beginning, the scene raised questions. O'Keefe was found near the road, but not in the driveway. His injuries were severe, blunt force trauma to the head, lacerations, and signs consistent with prolonged exposure to cold. The prosecution would later argue that Karen Reed, intoxicated and angry, struck him with her SUV during an argument, then left him there to die in the storm. But the defense would tell a very different story. They would argue that O'Keefe never made it back to the road alive. That something happened inside the house. That he was injured during an altercation. And that what followed was not just a tragic death, but a deliberate effort to shift blame away from those inside. As investigators began piecing together the timeline, Karen Reed's own words became a focal point. Witnesses recalled her asking, "Did I hit him?" The prosecution framed this as an admission of guilt. The defense framed it as the frantic confusion of someone discovering the love of her life dying in the snow. Police examined Karen Reed's Lexus. They found a cracked taillight. To the prosecution, it was a smoking gun. To the defense, it was circumstantial, poorly documented, and potentially contaminated. Questions arose about how and when evidence was collected, who had access to it, and why standard procedures appeared inconsistently followed. When Karen Reed was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence, and leaving the scene of a fatal accident, the case exploded into the public consciousness. This wasn't just a tragic death. It was a story involving law enforcement, insider relationships, conflicting loyalties, and a community divided down the middle. The trial became a spectacle. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors laid out their theory step by step. They presented data from vehicle telemetry, expert testimony on crash reconstruction, and witnesses who spoke about Karen Reed's behavior that night. They argued that the damage to the Lexus aligned with a pedestrian strike, that O'Keefe's injuries were consistent with being hit by a vehicle, and that Karen Reed's statements pointed to guilt. The defense countered aggressively. They pointed to the lack of blood or tissue evidence on the SUV. They challenged the reliability of the crash analysis. They highlighted injuries that, in their view, did not match a vehicular impact. They raised alarms about conflicts of interest, missing footage, and what they described as an investigation riddled with tunnel vision. Perhaps most damaging to the prosecution was the issue of reasonable doubt. The defense didn't need to prove exactly what happened inside the house. They only needed to show that the state's version of events was not the only plausible explanation. And as witnesses testified, cracks began to form. Text messages were scrutinized. Phone records were dissected. Timelines were stretched and compressed. The jury watched as experts disagreed, as memories conflicted, as certainty gave way to ambiguity. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered. Some held signs declaring Karen Reed innocent. Others demanded justice for John O'Keefe. The case had become more than a trial. It was a referendum on trust. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. And then, they deadlocked. A mistrial was declared. No verdict. No closure. Just more questions. What followed was nearly as dramatic as the trial itself. The defense argued that jurors had actually reached unanimous agreement on some charges before the mistrial was declared, raising serious double jeopardy concerns. Appeals were filed. Motions were argued. The case climbed the legal ladder, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ultimately declined to intervene. A retrial was scheduled. By the time jury selection began again, the Karen Reed case had already become a national true crime phenomenon. Podcasts dissected every detail. Online communities debated theories with near-religious fervor. Some believed Karen Reed was the victim of a cover-up. Others believed the evidence, while imperfect, pointed squarely at her. The retrial introduced new experts, refined arguments, and a jury fully aware that the first panel couldn't agree. This time, the prosecution narrowed its focus. The defense sharpened its attacks. The courtroom tension was palpable. When the verdict finally came, it surprised many. Karen Reed was acquitted of the most serious charges. No second-degree murder. No manslaughter. No leaving the scene. She was convicted only of operating under the influence. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was devastating. John O'Keefe's family expressed heartbreak and anger, believing justice had slipped away. Karen Reed, while legally cleared of killing him, would forever be tied to the night he died. Today, the questions linger. Was this a tragic accident amplified by alcohol and confusion? Was it a rushed investigation shaped by internal relationships? Or was it something darker, something that will never fully come to light? The Karen Reed case forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about certainty, about bias, about how narratives form long before verdicts are reached. It reminds us that the justice system is built not on absolute truth, but on what can be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And as the snow fell quietly on Fairview Road that morning, it marked the end of a life, the beginning of a legal storm, and a story that continues to divide anyone who hears it. What do you believe happened that night? If you are interested in exploring more true crime stories, subscribe to this channel now and turn on your notification button. Let us share your view in the comments section. Thanks for watching.